This video, titled Shading, How Light Works on Planet Earth, is going to teach you that light has a very specific and predictable behavior that, once it's pointed out, is fairly easy to understand, and that you need to understand this in order to be able to shade drawings, to get the patterns of light versus dark to behave in keeping with the way things really occur in nature. And if you learn to shade basic geometric forms with light coming from a direct or diffuse source and coming from any direction, you can shade anything from life or imagination, as these forms underlie all that you see. An example would be the human body can be simplified into cylinders, spheres, and cones. This chart shows how a single direct source of light affects cylinders, cones, spheres, and I'll be referring to this throughout this video. The most common error made in shading is assuming that whatever form is being struck by the light, that the part of that form that is closest to the light source is the lightest, and if it's a curved or rounded form, it shifts from light to middle value in the center of the form and dark on the far side from the light source of the form. That's not the way light works. The way light works is that the light divides a curved or rounded form into essentially an overall light side and dark side. The light side and dark side, where they meet in the center, is an area of the strongest dark, which is called the core of the shadow, sometimes referred to as the turning edge. So the pattern of light is going from light to dark to middle, as opposed to the wrong way, which is going from light to middle to dark. What you need to learn how to do is to follow the path of the light. I call this following the photon. So if we start with the light source, and in that chart you'll see the L that's encircled with an arrow pointing is the symbol for light source. What you need to know about the light source is the light emanating from it functioning with a warm or a cool bias, or possibly a color bias, because that's going to affect the way the object being struck by the light looks. You're also going to want to know, is it a single direct source of light, or is it diffused, soft scattered light, or are there multiple light sources? You're going to need to understand, as the light passes the object, some of it will hit the object and some of it will pass it. Does it strike a barrier and reflect back on the far side of the object? And how strong is that reflected light? Of course, you'll also want to know how strong the direct light is, and know that the overall light side, which gets directly struck by the light, is going to be lighter in value than the far side, the side that's in shadow, which is a combination of the middle value, the area of the form that's receiving the most reflected light, and the area that receives essentially no light is that middle band of darkness, again called the core of the shadow, or sometimes the turning edge. The area of the ground, possibly a table surface, that doesn't receive light because the form itself blocks the light out, is an area of darkness called the cast shadow. Characteristics of the cast shadow are that it is deeper in value at the base of the object and lightens up as it trails away from the object. Also, the edge of the cast shadow is sharper, harder at the base of the object, and gets softer or fuzzier as it moves away. The reason for the lightness and the fuzziness of the cast shadow further away from the object is that area of the cast shadow is closer to the reflected light and therefore is more illuminated than the area at the base of the object. On the light side of the object, if the object is smooth, there will be a highlight, which is the brightest value. Often it will actually be white, as in 0% gray. The highlight exists on the light side about 1/3 of the way offset between the edge closest to the light source and the turning edge. So the highlight is not on the very edge of the object, and it's not in the middle of the light side. It's about 1/3 of the way from the near edge to the light source, and 2/3 of the way from the core of the shadow. So again, we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the object is brightest closest to the light source and gradually gets darker and darker. Though I have to admit that until I was taught the very thing I'm teaching you, I didn't know that. And what I want you to do is to not just know it, but to look for it day in and day out for the rest of your life. It's been around you the whole time. A lot of people see it as being kind of counterintuitive, but it's always been there. You just haven't paid attention to it. So from this point on, pay attention to it. It'll improve your drawing and painting unbelievably in terms of making things look realistic, volumetric, like they really have weight. So let's look at and try to understand the essential difference between diffused light and a single direct source of light. And with the image of the hand, the first image is bathed in fluorescent light, which is light that scatters all over the environment. It doesn't come from any one direction. And one of the characteristics of diffused light is that if it casts any shadow at all, the shadow is light and very soft. And that being opposed to the next image with the hand being struck by a single direct source of light, you can see the cast shadow is very strong, and you can also see a lot of drama going on within the hand itself in terms of shifts from light to dark. Diffused light is shown in my studio with the overhead fluorescent lights, but it's not at all uncommon in nature. On any day that is foggy or misty or cloudy, the light is very scattered and diffused, and shadows are light and kind of amorphous in value, not very clear. So in the next image, I'm showing you props that I'll be using throughout this video that are bathed in that diffused fluorescent light. And you can see that they're not dramatic like the hand was. I'll be using a single direct source of light, which is depicted in the next image. And you can see that there is a lot of drama in terms of light side, dark side, with the objects and very strong cast shadows. A single direct source of light also is very common in nature. It happens every day that the sun's out, and it's not cloudy or misty, so that we get strong directional light. It also happens with moonlight, and as in the picture with Nefertiti's and the lamp, it happens any time that you're indoors with a single lamp on. So again, with a single source of light, as it strikes a curved or rounded objects, you're going to have issues of the reflected light partially illuminating the far side, getting that pattern going from light to dark to middle value. So with the single direct source of light, you get again what's shown in the diagram, of the overall light side, dark side, with the core of the shadow in the middle, cast shadow extending out from the shadowed side of the form, and a highlight offset towards the edge of the lighted side. That same basic pattern holds true of other geometric forms such as the cone and the sphere. Note in the drawing of the sphere that I've detached the cast shadow from the sphere itself, which gives the sensation of the sphere floating. Also, if a sphere happened to be lit exactly half in light and half in shadow, the turning edge, that dark band of value, would run vertical. Bottom is a straight line. And that isn't as convincing to get the sense of roundness across. So in that case, like I did in this illustration, I went ahead and curved the turning edge because it makes it more clear to the viewer that we're actually dealing with a globe. The next image of the brick is an example of a volumetric rectangle. And again, if you can learn to shade the basic geometric forms of the cylinder, the cone, the sphere, and a volumetric rectangle, you can shade anything because, again, those are the basic underlying geometric forms. In this image, I show three different patterns of middle value and dark that would show up in backlighting. Backlighting is when the light is coming towards you, so your subject matter is in shadow. Out of the three possible patterns, the one that is most convincing to your audience is the one on the left, where going from side to side, we go dark to middle value to dark. So that's what I recommend you do. A lot of times, just like curving the turning edge on an orb or a globe, we don't always do things exactly the way they look in reality, because sometimes tweaking it or bending it a little bit differently makes it more clear to the viewer. In this image, we have three cylindrical shapes being struck directly by frontal light. There's very little contrast from side to side. It shifts from a light gray to a general light, back to a light gray again. It's very soft and not dramatic. And the next image is just another example of an object that's frontally lit. So in this image, we see cylindrical objects and one spherical object that are side lit with a single source of direct light. And you can see there's much more drama compared to the diffused light in terms of the boldness of the pattern of light to dark. There's also that pattern that's going, in this case the light's coming from the right side, and from the right side across, it runs light, dark, middle value, and we've got very clear and bold cast shadows. So as a general consideration, side lighting provides strong contrast, drama, and is very descriptive of form, gives a real sense of weight and mass of the form, and also shows texture off. If you were going to make an image of Hercules fighting a lion, side lighting would be good. If you were doing an image of a marshmallow or a fragile cracked egg, that side lighting, that strong drama, would not be effective. And that's opposed to the frontal lighting, which is soft, delicate, low in contrast, and not very descriptive of form or texture. And that frontal lighting, which, by the way, objects in diffused light look just like objects in frontal lighting. Either one of those would be great for the marshmallow or the cracked egg, but would be very ineffective in terms of Hercules fighting the lion. So those are some general considerations. When you're dealing with things that you want to be bold and strong, go for the side lighting. When you want to deal with things that are soft and fragile and delicate, go for the frontal lighting or the diffused light. Here in this image with Casper and Nefertiti's, we get a chance to start to understand that objects that are smooth and slick and polished, like Nefertiti's, have strong highlights, the potential for that in the side lighting, and are very receptive to the reflected light, so that middle value being created by the reflected light butts up against the far side of the core of the shadow, and the other side, of course, butts up against the light side, so that with smooth, slick objects, the turning edge is more apparent. When we look at Casper, especially his terry cloth ghost suit, is highly textured. So a textured object has often no highlights or very faint highlights whatsoever. Also, it is less receptive to the reflected light. So if we look at Casper's torso, the reflected light versus the core of the shadow, there's not that much contrast. The reason why there is more reflected light contrast on Casper's extended arms is because they're picking up light that's bouncing off the ground and up into the arms, whereas the torso is trying to gather reflected light, and there's no clear barrier that's reflecting it back. So things to remember are that it really matters what the texture of an object is. Smooth and slick, bright highlights, receptive to reflected light, and a more apparent core of the shadow. Soft and textured is the opposite of that. In the next couple of images, we'll just take a look at volumetric rectangles. Like the brick, here are some boxes. And what you're seeing is more apparent with the box on the top, the small box. You can see that the vertical side on the right is the lightest value. The top of the box is a middle value that's clearly darker. And then the vertical side on the left is a rich middle gray with a dark and strong cast shadow. In the case of the bigger box, there's not as much clarity in terms of the right vertical side being clearly lighter than the top of the box. That has to do with its proximity to the direct light, which is coming from above and is illuminating the smaller box a little more strongly than the bigger box. If I were drawing this, though, I would treat the bigger box more like the little box and make the right vertical side more clearly lighter. It's ever so lighter. It's perceptible now. It's ever so slightly lighter than the top, but I would make it more clearly lighter than the top because, again, it would be more understandable to the viewer. And here, when we look at the brick, it's very clear with the right vertical side lightest, next value, top, next value, vertical, left side, and then very rich dark cast shadow. In the next couple of images with the brick, what I've done is I've created multiple light sources, which is one of the phenomena that exists, and it's more complicated, but it still can be deciphered. And things that you can use as a gauge to understand what's happening is to look at the number of different shadows that are occurring, and knowing that the shadows that are darkest are the shadows that are being cast by the strongest light source, and then the second strongest or the third strongest is just a matter of reading the value in the different shadows. In this next image, types of directional light is we're looking from above down onto the square as a table, the circle with the S in the middle of the table is the subject matter, V with the two arrows, as in two eyes, are the viewer, and then the L's are different light sources. And we need to understand and learn the names of these directions. So side lighting, the ones labeled side, are coming in perpendicular to the viewpoint of the viewer, the person doing the drawing. Frontal lighting strikes the subject in the same direction that the viewer is looking. Backlighting is coming from behind the object and toward the viewer, therefore the subject is all in shadow. Rim lighting can occur on either side, and that's just an angle that's in between side and back lighting, as is the form lighting is an angle that's between the side lighting and the frontal lighting. You should be able to create this along with your understanding of how light strikes those geometric forms so that you could shade any subject from any angle, just understanding these basic principles. This next image is just an example of those basic forms, and it lays out the different kinds, the different directional lighting. The next couple of images are images of a flag that has a radical fold in it. It has a deep fold in it. And if you notice, as the two drawings are labeled, that the fold goes from light to dark to middle value, just like a cylinder. And it does have a cast shadow, just like a cylinder. The fact is that all you ever see of a cylinder or a round curved object is 180 degrees of it, which is as much as you see in a deep fold. So in terms of doing folds in fabric, treat them like you would treat a cylinder, and you will succeed. Now we'll take some time to look at artworks that exploit the shading that I've been talking about. An artist who exploited accurate, sometimes exaggerated, but still the basic accurate lighting coming normally from a single direct source of light and often from the side is Salvador Dali. And you can see on the gold surrounding of the clock, a light side, a strong turning edge, strong reflected light, cast shadow, and that amorphic shape in the center on its far left edge, you see a strong turning edge and then softer reflected light. On this image here, we've got a classic rounded object. If we just take the egg itself, you can see over on the left side a strong turning edge, reflected light, cast shadow. And that's not the only place where that phenomenon is occurring in the image. One of the things that Dali did in a lot of his images is that he kept the whole shadow a strong, dark, and hard edge all the way across, which isn't natural, but it's the way he did things. Here's pop culture. A couple of images will come up of old illustrations, and here we've got our pirate who is being struck on the left side by a warm source of light and then a weaker source of light or reflected light that has a yellowish green cast to it coming in from the right side and a turning edge running essentially down through the middle of the form. And Our Lady, who seems to be engaged in very heavy drama here, has the same basic thing where it looks like she's getting struck on the left side as we face the illustration by a more natural light, and then you can see, especially through her nose, but through the rest of her face and her chin and on her brow, there's an area of darkness. That's the core of the shadow, and then coming from the other side, and this could be a secondary source of light, or it could be I don't know what the exact circumstances, but it definitely has a yellowish cast, which gives the image a whole lot of curiosity and drama. Speaking of curiosity and drama, this is a charcoal drawing I did called Metamorphosized Head, where we get the figure. Actually, I've blended things together of a baby and an old man, which I did back in the early 70s before Photoshop exists. Now you can get this done digitally with the pressing a button. But at any rate, I brought light in from the right side, and then you can see a very strong turning edge running through the form, and then it's picking up reflected light on the left side. And here's a series of self-portraits that I did. And again, light coming in from the right, and a general pattern of dark, core of the shadow, running through the middle of the face, and then reflected light coming in from the left. And you can see, especially clearly in this image, down on the bottom, that the folds are doing the same thing that the general overall image is doing. Again, from right to left, going from light to dark to middle value, often then casting a shadow. And the same with this image here. And this is a detail from a watercolor. Again, strong light happens once again to be coming in from the right side, and then you can see especially from the temple through the cheek and chin, the strong dark turning edge, and then the middle value of the reflected light on the left side. Here's an image of an etching titled Fortune Teller, and with the folds in the Fortune Teller, it's behaving as we've been talking about, but one of the things I want to point out is that her hand that hovers above the yellow globe is picking up the yellow light. In this image, a watercolor of windmills, what I want you to notice is on the blades and kind of the fuselage of the fan, it's picking up a lot of reflected yellow coming from the yellowish grass. In the reality of the situation, there was only the most vague, faint trace of yellow in the more horizontal blades. I exaggerated the effect of the yellow reflected light coming up into the blades in the fuselage considerably. What this does is it really connects and causes elements within the image to interact with each other. The blades are being affected by the grass, the color of the grass. When this happens, it makes an image so much more convincing to the viewer. In this image here, titled Motel Madness, I've got a huge demonstration throughout the frame structure of the rocking horse and our crazed rocking horse, light side, deep turning edges, strong reflected light. But another characteristic that I want to point out that is in this image is the shadow of the bush onto the grass and the shadow of the fire hydrant onto the dried out grass. Is the edge of the shadow is fractured in a zigzag pattern that is the same basic pattern as the texture of the grass. So one of the things that you need to understand about cast shadows, but you can, with that understanding, really exploit them, is that cast shadows take on the edge quality of the texture that they're cast upon. And sometimes what a cast shadow can do is actually explain the texture more clearly to the viewer than the area that's illuminated. So in conclusion, if you learn how light behaves on planet Earth by following the photon, so you understand the nature of the light source, the path of the light, and you understand the variation in terms of direction of light, the variation in terms of diffused light versus single source direct light versus multiple sources of light, and you learn how to shade those circumstances with basic geometric forms, that again being cylinder, cone, globe or sphere, and volumetric rectangle, you'll be able to apply that knowledge to anything, whether you're drawing from nature or reality. And a lot of times the phenomena, those components will show up very clearly, amazingly clearly. Other times it's more subtle. One of the things you can always do when things are more subtle, less dramatic, is hype it up a little bit for the sake of added drama and to give a higher sense of illusion, like weight and a sense of real volume to your subject matter itself. What I encourage you to do, if these concepts and considerations are brand new to you, and even if they're not, is to be on the lookout for this phenomena. It's all over, it's all around you, it's surrounded you your whole life. But most of us didn't have a reason to be aware of it. But as an artist, you need to be aware of it, and you need to know that if you follow those fundamentals, you're going to have drawings that are much more strong. Drawings and paintings, stronger, greater sense of illusion, greater sense of volume and mass. So other things I would suggest doing is, I showed you so many images with still life props and single source of light and diffuse light, and I would find yourself a white cylinder, roll of paper towels, toilet paper. Find yourself a white cylinder that's smooth and slick, white coffee cup, and set those things up and take the time to observe them. When I was teaching, I would give a lecture, verbal with some slides, to the class first, and then I would actually set up all those little props with the class and make the class look at it until they could tell me that they actually saw what I was saying was true of what was occurring. And what's important about that is it takes the kind of yada yada of listening to a talking head spew out information out of the realm of, God, I heard about it, yeah, it's probably true, into actually observing it, where you can take that information and incorporate it into your belief system. And once that's there, and once you've made these observations, it's going to be with you always. It'll be at your beck and call to help you understand what you're seeing, to help you exaggerate what you're seeing at times if that's what you want to do, or even downplay it at times if you want to make something seem less dramatic. It also, if you're drawing from imagination, it gives you a way of making things look as realistic as you'd like to. So in conclusion, I want you to take advantage of, for what for many of you is a new perspective on reality, and understand that it's going to improve your production of artwork. It's going to improve your understanding of the world you live in. It's really not complicated. You've actually known all this unconsciously. All we're doing is bringing this conscious, this once unconscious observation up to a conscious level and applying it to drawing and painting. Best of luck with your future artworks.